Welcome to the Wise and Happy Life podcast, where ancient wisdom meets modern science, and mindfulness, philosophy, and happiness practices blend with neuroscience, compassion, and common sense. Hosted by Bob Martin, meditation mentor, happiness coach, trial lawyer, and entrepreneur. This podcast explores how to live with grace, presence, and purpose in a complex world.
Hey, hello, good people, and welcome to another episode of a Wise and Happy Life podcast. And as you know, I always like to start off the podcast with a story that sets the theme for what we're going to be talking about today. And I want to tell you about a student of mine recently. As you know, I teach meditation, and we're about 3 weeks into the course. And this particular student has a lot of anxiety and has been talking about that. And there's a certain kind of meditation called Gatha, where you repeat phrases as you breathe in and breathe out. And two of those phrases is breathing in, I calm my body and my mind. Breathing out, I smile. And she sends me in her log that whenever she starts getting close to the phrase, I calm my body and my mind, she starts thinking about how she's going to do that and if she's going to be able to do it and how she's going to do it. And then she fears that she's not going to be able to do it. And then even as she says it, she's feeling how inauthentic she feels because she knows she's being anxious and she's not accomplishing the statement that she's making, and on and on. And then she says, but then when I say the next statement, breathing out, I smile, then I can get calm. And so that allowed us to get into a conversation about how trying even to do something like calming yourself really creates more anxiety just by the desire to accomplish it. And that by allowing herself to become calm, when she said, I smiled, she learned what it felt like to allow things. So that was the conversation we had. And the next week, I got a log from her that said, I'm 63 years old and I'm just beginning to learn what freedom is. And today's guest is the model of understanding freedom and grace. She has an amazing story growing up in a very religious background and then coming into a community where she was presented with this opportunity to build a monastery. Build a monastery. This is Kimberly Braun, and she's going to tell you this amazing story. Kimberly, say hi to the folks and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Great to be with you today. What is there to tell? We are souls in this playground of self-discovery, discovery of the divine, and I've been at the service of it all my life. So it is always an ever-growing, ever-expansive, ever more stepping into the unknown. That's the most important part of me. I could give you a lot of the details of
But that
titles and service, and
your sense of connection to the divine started at an early age.
it did. It formed a cosmology for me that has never faded, that has remained ever vital and brilliant. And I think that's the test, the litmus test of when we have experienced something eternal within ourselves, is that it never fades. And I think that each one of us could unearth many times that this has happened, whether we remember it or not, whether it's alive within us or not, as something that impacts our thinking. But yeah, I, I'm told that there were numerous experiences that happened when I was younger than 5, but the first really powerful experience I remember from when I was 5 or 6. It was one of those two, because it was walking to and from school during autumn. And that experience caught all of me up in a knowing of what life is about in these bodies, in such a way that it's still my learning ground and it's still my consolation. So that I think is a remarkable grace. And what's an added grace is, as a human being on a personality level, I understood at that age that this is what made me happy. or this is what satisfied my mind. Like I connected dots, and that then led me to a commitment to this spiritual path, if you will, if you want to call it that. Because I think children are always having a lot of eternal experiences. And as children, sometimes we remember those experiences and sometimes we don't. And because I was so curious, I remember my experiences vividly.
So that led you to which vows and which commitments?
It led me to a knowing that all my life, and this is my language then, all my life was about one thing: being and becoming in God. And so it led me to a commitment to that path. Uh, and it led me to a knowing that all creation is coming into form, impelled by some God force, some eternal source, and that that form is an expression of this eternal source. So back then, my language was all personal God. I was very Catholic in an awesome, awesome, beautiful Catholic environment. And so that would have been my language then. My language has changed a lot around it, just because my understanding of the nuances have changed as well. But that's it. And I knew my life would be about nothing else because it was the only thing that life was about. I made this massive jump into, wow, this is it. And life has never challenged that. Life has never brought that into a place where I've doubted it or felt uncertainty, even in my own dark moments of personal growth. It has always been within the embrace of that knowing, which is very consoling. You mentioned unconditional love that doesn't need to be worked at or merited. And this is, yeah, it,
Well, in practical terms, or more pedantic terms, you became a nun.
I did like 20 years later. Yes.
Yeah, let's give some insight into what that was like, and you entered the becoming a nun, and then you left becoming a nun, and what was that evolution like, in your thinking and in your sense of spirituality?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's got a lot of different layers to it. A
Hmm,
lot of
I
times,
imagine that it does. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of people, and maybe if you're listening, you might position it this way that uh, it was more from a place of change. And for me, it was more of a place of continuity. And so I have to frame my response with that. Growing up, my mom and dad and our family were involved in a lot of charismatic aspects of being Christian, which meant we were really open to the presence of God, to the power of prayer, to the openness to healing gifts, and to the sense of mystical body, meaning that we had many friends that weren't even in form. You could call them loved ones, angels. So my setup was nurturing for me on a mystic level to give an even bigger ascent to these aspects of myself. That doesn't mean that I shared a lot with my family because I think I kind of felt like everybody was probably having the same experiences, so I didn't talk about a lot of my mystical experiences, but I have learned since that some of them were unique to me. And anyway, we were in that environment, and I had a lot of phenomena happening all my life up until I went through a really big dark night. I entered it when I was about 16 and a half years old, and I came through it when I was 19. And it was a real dilemma over on a personality level. Was passion spiritual? And that sounds so simple, like you could listen to it and go,
Hmm.
well, of course it is. But
Hmm.
for for you who are listening, and I'm sure that you are open to your path, you know that these deep wounds within the self worth around who you are on a personality level, your identity as a soul, what the qualities of your life are. These are growing points, and we encounter individual and collective woundedness. And on an individual and a collective way, I was encountering all the ways humanity does not see passion as being spiritual, and also recognizing that I was a very passionate person, like enthusiastic about everything. Uh, Passion isn't just sex. Passion is like a juice for life, a curiosity about the evolution of thought, a wanting to pioneer into new lands. It catches up everything that's a fire of desire. And so it was a real dark night for me, because recognizing that was a big part of who I was, how did I reconcile that with my hunger and my knowing of being a spiritual being? It was very existential. And
Hmm.
I went to a period where I felt completely bereft of any support from God. Like it
Mm.
was like completely alone in this dark night, even though I was being held in it. It was like the footprints poem where you saw the one set
Hmm.
of tracks and you
Yeah,
find you've
right.
been carried all along. That's what it was. Well, when I emerged through that dark night, I had the direct realization that to be passionate is spirit created, not even spiritual, but it is, because the divine has the desire to come into form. And to be of form is to come forward on a very deep soul level from the desire of the divine in some mysterious play. So that was completely reconciled within me. And when that deep concern was healed, my mystical phenomena went off the charts. I was a bit like Eckhart Tolle sitting on a park bench. I mean, the veil was so thin, and everything was shape shifting, and miracles were happening left and right. And I was having visions and bilocation and all sorts of it unleashed a capacity within me that was definitely very multidimensional. And so during that time, I was really I was in Santa Cruz working with the homeless and working on some college degree, and in a beautiful community of other people that loved contemplation. And I was longing for friendship in these realms that were had taken over my life. I looked for a spiritual director so I could have a confidant, and couldn't find anybody that could understand what was happening within me, which was a cosmic setup, because then one of my roommates gave me the autobiography of Teresa of Avila, who I had never heard of, who is a Carmelite mystic from the 1500s. And I opened the book and I began reading her story. She's telling it, it's her words. And I'm weeping, Bob. I'm just weeping. I'm sitting on the couch. I couldn't put the book down. I'm just weeping, because everything that was happening within her was what was happening within me. And instantly she became one of my close friends. She was as real to me as you sitting here. And then synchronistically, these other Carmelites fell into my lap. The next one was Therese of Lisieux, another Carmelite mystic from the late 1800s. And I read her book in one night. It burned like you think about like what's it called when a cattle, branded. I was
Hmm.
branded with the message in her book. It like fired itself on my heart. And so all these Carmelites are showing up. So they naturally became my friends. And then walking this path of love, because I was consumed in love. I mean, I was on fire, love. I went I went hiking with a friend in I think it's Colorado Mountain. That's the name of the mountain in California near Carmel. And she said, I grew up in Carmel. Let's go to a liturgy that's at the Carmelite Monastery. And here I just become friends with all these Carmelites. And I didn't even know there was a monastery there. And I was like, okay. So we're there at this liturgy, and I was completely taken up into an ecstasy. And then the mass ends, and then finally it subsides, and my girlfriend and I go to leave. It's a Saturday morning, and there were all these other people because it was a really big day for them to all go to church, are all outside and chattering away. And she and I just want to kind of slide through and go out on our hike. And out of nowhere, the priest who led the mass pushed his way through people to get to us. And she and I were both kind of like, wow, this is like weird. Like, and he stands right in front of me and he looks at me. And with all the sincerity of his heart, he says, promise me you will pray for me. Which let me know he saw some of what I was experiencing there at the liturgy. And it just, it was kind of like being wooed and courted into the Carmelite path because it all made sense with where I already was. And I began to hunger to join a monastery because I was so on fire with love. And it was so simple. It was like when you're a child and you have an ice cream you love and you just want to enjoy that ice cream at night. Or when you love being with a parent and you just want to be spending time with them. It was that simple. I wasn't a seeker. I didn't have a goal. I just wanted to be with the beloved. And so I joined at 24. So that honeymoon period was about 5 years long. So I joined a monastery in North Dakota. I mean, there were lots of miracles that even led more even up to that moment,
Hmm.
which are fun. They're in my first book that's called Love Calls. You can read those stories in there. Uh, and I entered the monastery, and it was a very traditional, conservative environment. What attracted me was they were one of the only monasteries that kept the traditional schedule of getting up at midnight and getting up again at 5:30, and the day being revolving around chant and meditation. Many monasteries were getting smaller and smaller, and they couldn't keep that rigorous schedule. So this one was a young community. Well, it was an older community, but had a lot of young women in it. And they were able to keep the schedule and farm the land and live that simple life. So I entered there, but it was very conservative. And when I entered, I didn't realize that my family could only visit once a year. I asked none of the right questions. Like, you know, I didn't realize that I was only going to be allowed to write a letter every 6 weeks and receive mail every 6 weeks. Like there were so many things I had no idea that I was giving up um, because I was just so smitten. But it was a powerful life because it really opened up the power of what I call is a sacramental theology. And I have grown and evolved to understand that each moment has a sacramental quality, that each moment is potent with the divine. And that kind of setup monastically set you up for developing the skillfulness to awaken to that reality. So it was very simple lifestyle. We were chanting and meditating a lot. I have a lot
That
of
was a pretty crowded, or compact, let's put it that way, monastery, yes? And they wanted to expand?
Yes, that's when I went to Texas. So in North Dakota, the 20 women that were there, they had a regular size monastery. So it was like a working community and they could have all the rituals and they could have all the everything that would go into monastic life happened with ease there. And we also farmed the land and we lived probably like 90% off what we farmed. Then when I took solemn vows, that's vows for life, because I really thought I was going to be there for the rest of my life. Right before I took vows, they had asked me if I would join the daughter community in Texas because they needed young women there. They were struggling. It was a new foundation, which is what it's called when you're starting a new place. They just needed young bodies. They needed zealous young sisters who were more physically in shape, spiritually on fire, and young and excited about and but my reason for going was because I had a vision of Mary, and Mary told me to go, Mary, the Mother of God. And that was my reason. And that's in this book that I just published, is that
And the
whole
name of that book is
Miracles in the Naked Light.
great. You have
Yeah.
a copy there. Show us.
You know what I did? I just clicked out of it when we changed our medium. Let me pull up the copy and you can see it. Just sold out. I came back from a conference, so I'm waiting for more books to come to me, which is a good fault to have. I will pull up the cover. Yes. So I went down there 20, 30 years younger than everybody else in that community. And I assumed, here's a great picture, Miracles in the Naked Light.
Mm-hmm.
That's on my website, kimberlybraun.com. You can see
Okay.
it. And I can open it too if we want to read any. And I assumed I was going to be scrubbing toilets and floors and cooking and doing laundry, because it's a hierarchical community. So you're not really in leadership when you're young. And I was shocked. I actually was made the right-hand person to the leader called the prioress in the community. And I did not want that role, but I accepted it, and I was naturally good at it. I'm a natural leader. So it worked, even though I really wanted much more silence and, less, less on that decision-making level of things.
So let me just ask this for people that may not be familiar with,
Yeah.
monasteries and its connection. This would come under the umbrella of Catholic.
This one's Catholic.
Okay,
And
now I
how?
don't mean I'm not trying to be simplistic here or
No,
the like,
no.
but I just think it helps folks to put it into some perspective that this is, within the umbrella of Catholicism. This is a Catholic monastery following many of the rituals and traditions of Catholicism. Yes.
Correct. So you have a liturgical schedule. You follow very ancient forms that we chanted, mainly Gregorian chant, which is all Latin,
Mm-hmm.
and it existed before Gregory the Great in the 5th century, but because he had the money as Pope to get it written down, it's named after him. But it existed before then. He was just the one that pulled it all
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
together. And for those of you out there that might not be familiar, this may sound like it's from a foreign land. You can liken it to when you see Buddhist monks. So that's very popular in Western culture, to see pictures of Buddhist monks meditating or ringing bells or prostrating or doing various practices. Very similar,
Mm-hmm.
very similar way to live. Yes.
So I know that your book goes into great detail about the breakout into actually becoming a vital and a vital force in creating and building, what is it, a $9 million monastery.
Valued, yeah.
and
17,000 square feet.
and give us a little bit of that story, but I want to get to some of the wisdoms that you have to share. So give us a little taste of that, and then we'll go on to talking about some things that I think are just so fascinating, like freedom and grace. But give
Right.
us a little taste of how you were called to take on this immense task.
You know, in some ways, it would have been so awesome, Bob, if we sat down as a community, sat around the table and said, how are we going to do this? Like the normal strategic planning that go into good business. And that is
Hmm.
not at all what happened. And, you know, and that has pros and cons. On the downside, it it does not set up the sets of expectations, the respect and the understanding that go into when you create a plan together, the roles and responsibilities. That was on the downside there. So as a young nun, I don't know that I felt very appreciated or affirmed for what was flowing through me. And I wasn't doing it for that reason. But in intimacy, there's something very powerful about when we see and love and support each other.
Hmm.
So on the downside, I'll just say that but on the upside, there's no way anybody would have entrusted this project to me as a young 29-year-old newly vowed nun if it hadn't just been downloaded, if it hadn't just happened like a waterfall. And that's what happened is I was meditating out in our backyard. I was in a place, and this may be significant for you that are listening. I was in a place where I felt dissatisfaction. And sometimes we can think that our dissatisfaction is a bad thing. Like, oh my gosh, I need to always be content with what is.
Mhm.
But when we express our dissatisfaction from a place of trust and vulnerability to that source of all, we have the opportunity to be heard and seen and to gain the kind of direction and consolation that we're longing for. It opens us up to be impelled by that. And I was dissatisfied because I wanted more silence. I was in a new foundation. We were really small. It was a converted house. The people in the town, San Angelo, loved us so much, and I loved them. And they were always ringing the doorbell to give us stuff. And I loved them so much. So if they ever listen to this, I would never want them to feel bad. And we were unable to preserve the silence that monastic life normally is, just the circumstances. So as a young nun that was all on fire, I was like, what? It's kind of like when you say yes to something and you think you're going to go in a certain direction, and all of a sudden it's like the opposite happens. So I just was expressing that to my beloved. I'm like, I long for this. And it came up from my belly, from my gut. And as I released that emotion of desire for silence, it was like came through like my crown chakra. It was like a whoosh. And I heard internally from source, build the permanent monastery. And that response to my dissatisfaction neutralized the dissatisfaction. So I couldn't not say yes. And so I said yes, but I had no idea I was saying yes to actually being the general contractor. I honestly thought I was saying yes to it happening, and that as a
Mhm.
community it was going to happen. But that's not what happened. What happened was, because I had been made that right hand person to the leader in the community, I ended up having a lot of this building project fall on my lap. So a week or two after I had had that illumination, our community itself put on the agenda the possibility of building our monastery because we needed to move out of this house. They had been in it for like 9 or 10 years. I mean, it was a long time in that little house. I was new there 2 years in, but and uh, and so when everybody voted that we build our monastery, what happened was synchronicity started happening. We got offered a lot of land from Pierce and Dina Holt. We had people step forward to support us, to be a fundraising team, which ended up disbanding. But we had a lot of support step in. And naturally, unsolicited, when I had gotten that illumination, it was like the Matrix. If you have you seen the Matrix?
Mhm. Yeah.
So when Neo first goes into the takes the pill and goes in, he gets downloaded programs, right? He's like learns kung fu. That's what had happened to me. So when I had that illumination out in the wildflowers, unknown to me, within my neural pathways and my body and my mind, I was given the capacity to do something I had never done before. I was able to talk like an engineer or a general contractor. I was able to strategically plan a project and the process. I was able to grasp the relationship of all the disciplines. Like everything that goes into being a good general contractor was kind of like, whew. And
And this is what you're talking about when you say miracles, right?
yes,
I
yes,
mean, this is miraculous. That
yes.
is it is absolutely miraculous.
It is. It is. It's so true. I was just as surprised. I would be in these situations, and all of a sudden, I just start speaking. I'd be like, wow, I didn't realize I knew how to run electrical through standing through mortise and tenon red oak beams so easily. It's like crazy. So, but it became obvious to the leader as well. And I was naturally entrusted with the project, not because we voted on it, but because it was happening. It was like a self evident kind of thing. And so I really took the ball and ran. I'm a fire sign. If something really moves me, I run in that direction. And that youthful energy and that personality energy served the project really, really well. So I did. I cast a net in a massive amount of directions. Eh, When I wrote the book, Bob, this Miracles in the Naked Light book, I was doing a fact check because for years I told everybody that we did the groundbreaking on September 14th of 1997. Might have been September 15th, excuse me, 1997. And I said it's a miracle that we built a monastery with no land, no underground, within less than 3.5 years. And if you look at the artisanship, if you look at we dynamited to create the underground, like we did everything from scratch. We brought in three-phase line. Like all these things take time in addition to building a massive structure with no money. So I was always impressed by also the timing with which it happened. And then I'm doing the fact check to discover, what were the dates for different things. And I discovered it was 1998. It was September 15th of 1998 that we had the groundbreaking. So it was only 2.5 years that we did this project, not even 3.5. So I was like, holy cow.
So I'd like to stop here for a second
Yep.
and just take a breath. Whew. And I'd like to talk a little bit about this idea of synchronicity. For someone like you who has had the experience of that, what so many of us call the experience that so many of us come very close to when we talk about thin spaces, and you've actually pierced those thin spaces. You've actually connected and had experiences which you can't deny because they are experiences that you had. I mean, that are very real. That are very real,
Yeah.
and you might have a little bit more insight into this question that I think so many of us always wonder about. And the question is, are things merely coincidental, or is there actually some synchronicity? Is there actually a divine fiber that holds the universe together that truly can bring things to bear and connect things and bring them into our into usefulness just at the right time, at the right place, in the right way? Some of us, feel that it seems that way, but yet we're skeptical of it because we haven't had the experience that you've had.
Right.
Can you speak to that and help those of us who wonder about those things have a clearer understanding of your understanding?
Sure. Yes. And I think where we as human beings get tripped up is right time, right place.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if we've exercised a devotion in life that seems to bear no fruit to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we've given our whole hearts and we've opened up to the experience of the divine, and things still don't seem to have that quality that has the joy of synchronicity. Because
Mm-hmm.
the feeling of joy and liberation, synchronicity has a feeling of great freedom to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a rightness, there's a flow and an alignment that you can taste. And so I get exactly what you're saying. And when you experience what seems to not be it, it can lead to a doubt of, does it exist? Is that really truth?
Mm-hmm.
Should I really bank on it? And for me, it there are certain experiences that have resulted in a belief. There's like two or three foundational beliefs I have that I live my life by, and I can't not live my life by them.
Mm-hmm.
And they hold a steady candle with all of the contrast that happens in life. And one of those beliefs is that all of form is the formless, that everything that is created and creative and creation is a mysterious expression of the uncreated. And if that's so, this is a belief I'm sharing with you all, so you need to
Mm-hmm.
hold whether it's true or not.
Mm-hmm.
If that's actually so, then things are automatically always divinely orchestrated, because the pulse and the energy of existence itself is that in which it lives and moves and has its being.
I get that. I actually get that. And no, I do, because there are, quantum physics these days is verifying the observation of these things actually occurring on a quantum level,
Yes.
that out of apparently nothingness, form occurs, and
Yeah.
so that the form actually is formed out of the formless. And it's interesting that thousands of years ago, the great sages, um, this is what they spoke of. In the West, the physicists, have tried to prove what you're saying by observing the natural universe. Whereas in the East, the metaphysicists said if you look within, you can find these same answers.
Mhm.
And you have found them from within.
From within.
And I think that it is a satisfying thing for the Western mind to know that there is some verification that this isn't just perceptive stuff. This is actually the workings of the universe. And lately, another question I'd like to ask you. Thank you for that. First of all, thank you for that. Another question that I'd like you to ask you, one that I've been playing around with a bit lately, is emptiness. And is emptiness empty? And you know, I'm I'm a bit more common than you are. I'm a bit more pedantic, let's say, than you are. Um, but I look at space in terms of like the space, like up there, planets, space, you know, uh, and in that space are all of these forces which hold planets together and which tie things together. And now they find out that two electrons or two quantum particles that have had connection with each other could be on different light years apart. And
Yeah.
what happens to one affects the other. So the whole time space thing is being turned on its head. And um, and what I guess what I'm trying to say is what I am struggling with to understand about emptiness and and what emptiness is, which is pure potential, you have actually experienced.
Yeah, and that, I've even written poetry about emptiness, because as somebody that's impelled so much by fire of desire,
Mm-hmm.
when I experience qualities that are bereft of that, it feels empty,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you could, reduce that down to brain chemicals. Maybe I've got less
Mm-hmm.
beta endorphin and serotonin and oxytocin all going at that moment. uh, where I am more particular with my language around that is that emptiness oftentimes has an implicit sense of lack of
Mm-hmm.
something.
That's the baggage.
Yeah. And I have gravitated a lot more to the word silence and vastness, and words like that. Even
Hmm.
spaciousness falls short. And even right with science, they're like, well, we're largely all creation is nothing, right? I mean, science
Hmm.
is showing more and more that it's more nothing, and that could be terrifying to
Right.
encounter straight on. That largely everything is nothing.
Right. And the sages, they separate that word nothing into no thing,
Right, right.
right?
Yeah,
It's not nothing, it's that there's no
no
thing
thing.
there, but there doesn't mean that there's nothing there.
Yes, and
I know
there
this is really esoteric stuff.
I love it, and I think there's a great amount of consolation in having these kinds of reflections. So and I can't remember whether I read it in a Lakshmi Sutra or a Lakshmi Tantra or Siva Sutra, but they're one ancient cosmology that's out there. I'll give people two, but this is one, is that all of creation is a threefold experience of sound. There's audible sound, which is what we really identify as sound.
Sound.
There's subtle sound, and there's silent sound. And that silent sound isn't that from which sound comes, it's mysteriously also part of creation. That, that is the silence in which all generative activity is happening. And so I use a little bit more of that language because it helps relax into when we feel empty. When
Hmm.
we've given our, yeah.
Somebody described, I think what you're saying is the way somebody described it to me as, if it wasn't for the space between notes, there could not be music,
I've heard that too. Yes.
you know?
Yes.
And so that is, when you say silent sound, are we talking about that, the space between music that really has, that holds the music in it?
Yes. And I would say that that space between the notes is there even when the notes are emerging.
Hmm. It
So
is the creative force,
that's the
perhaps,
field, the
that
field.
emerges, that creates the emergence of the notes. Woo!
Yeah,
We're getting, like I say, this is not an esoteric conversation,
it is.
and we're kind of getting pushing up against the time. But I think that we've opened some wonderful doors of thought here, and I want to thank you for sharing the mystical experiences that you've had, um, as a testament that miracles happen, and that mystical experiences happen, and that simply because we may not be remembering, because I don't believe there's any of us that have not had a mystical experience, it's just whether we remember it or have accepted it as such, but they exist, and they bring forth, and they are creative of their own, in their own way. But uh, tell us a little bit about your website, where people can find out more, the books that tell your story. And folks, Kimberly's story is just a wonderful story, and the story of building the monastery in her new book is great. And if you want to delve into some of these very, very esoteric, very deep questions, you can find them in her books. And tell us where they are and their names again.
Sure. Yeah. And thank you for that. You can find all ways of connection with me or anything I'm doing on my website. I made it really easy. So, KimberlyBraun.com. I have 3 books there. And just a note about my books, I purposefully, as you can tell, I go into deep waters really fast. I purposefully do not make my books teaching books. So I'm not trying to take these large questions around existence and give teaching commentaries and reflections. But what I do is allow the elements of my day-to-day experience pull back the veil on how I'm learning from it, awakening during it, wrestling with it. So you get a very intimate journey with my books, which I've always found is usually a way we connect, because then it's like, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
have that happening too.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go into your own question. But Love Calls, and that's my first book, and that plays out my experience of the within wisdom arising from love as my very center, at my very center. Miracles in the Naked Light opens the story of that building project, and it's just delightful. And there's so many layers in that book. Oh my word. And then my third book I've got right here is my poetry, some of my poetry. I write a lot of poetry, Beloved Found. And the fourth book that finishes the monastery story is written, but I'm waiting to publish it because I'm traveling right now for my third book a lot. I have a free online community where we have little mystic moments. And I also have $11 a month paid where you can be part of my meditation immersions and group experiences. I've got something coming up in October with those two Carmelites we mentioned, Teresa of Avila and Therese of Lisieux. And you can connect with me through my newsletter or through an email or watch videos. You can see my TED Talk on my homepage that tells a bit about the monastery story as well. So KimberlyBraun.com. Super easy.
Thank you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing your story. And yeah, I always think of those expressions, a phrase from a movie, see you on the other side.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.